What happens when a street vendor with a dream faces off against a powerful food chain owner who mocks his ambitions? This is the story of resilience, redemption, and how one man turned ridicule into a triumph that inspired millions. The sun gleamed on the bustling city street, where the aroma of freshly cooked food wafted through the air. Vendors lined the sidewalks, their colorful carts offering everything from homemade pastries to spicy street tacos. In the middle of the activity stood Marcus, a young black man with a welcoming smile, working diligently behind his modest food cart. His cart, painted in vibrant hues, bore the name Grandma's Kitchen, a tribute to the woman who inspired his passion for cooking. Marcus's specialty was comfort food with a twist: savory chicken and waffles drizzled with spiced honey, creamy mac and cheese with a hint of smoked paprika, and his grandmother's signature peach cobbler. Despite his humble setup, his cart was a favorite in the community. People came not just for the food, but for Marcus's warm personality and the stories he shared about his journey. One afternoon, as Marcus served a regular customer, a sleek black car pulled up nearby. Out stepped Jonathan Reed, the owner of a prominent food chain. Dressed in a tailored suit and exuding arrogance, Jonathan strolled over to Marcus's cart, his expensive shoes clicking against the pavement. He scanned the setup with a smirk, his expression one of thinly veiled disdain. "Interesting little operation you've got here," Jonathan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know, this kind of thing might work in small neighborhoods, but in the real world, you'd never survive." Marcus paused, his hands still busy assembling an order. He looked up and met Jonathan's gaze, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I appreciate your opinion, but I've built something the community loves. That's all that matters to me." Jonathan chuckled, shaking his head. "Community? Sure. But real success takes more than some charming food cart. You'd be better off dreaming smaller." The words stung, but Marcus refused to show it. He straightened his posture and replied, "One day, I'll turn this dream into something bigger. You'll see." Jonathan burst into laughter, throwing his hands up in mock disbelief. "Well, good luck with that, kid. Maybe I'll see your name in lights someday, though I doubt it." He turned and walked away, leaving Marcus to serve his next customer. As Jonathan's car sped off, Marcus's regulars gathered closer, offering words of encouragement. "Don't listen to him, Marcus," said an elderly woman clutching a plate of peach cobbler. "Your food is the best thing on this street." Marcus smiled, his determination renewed. "Thank you," he said, glancing at the small handwritten sign on his cart. "Someday this little cart will be more than just a cart. It'll be the beginning of something incredible." Marcus's story began far from the bustling city streets. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood, surrounded by the comforting smells of his grandmother's kitchen. Her home was modest, but always filled with love, laughter, and the rich aroma of simmering stews, baked goods, and fried delights. For Marcus, those meals were more than just food. They were expressions of resilience, care, and a connection to his roots. As a child, Marcus spent hours by his grandmother's side, watching her prepare meals with an ease and grace that seemed almost magical. She would hum gospel tunes as she kneaded dough or sprinkled spices into a bubbling pot. "The secret to good food," she'd often say, "is cooking with love and a pinch of boldness." Inspired by her words, Marcus began experimenting with her recipes. By the time he was a teenager, he was hosting backyard cookouts for neighbors, tweaking traditional dishes with his own creative flair. The praise he received planted the seed of a dream, to one day share these flavors with the world. But dreaming was one thing, making it a reality was another. After graduating high school, Marcus found himself working long hours in menial jobs to make ends meet. Every paycheck went towards supporting his family and saving for his ultimate goal, starting his own food business. One day, while walking past a row of food carts in the city, inspiration struck. He realized that he didn't need a restaurant to begin. He could start small, just like those vendors. With his savings and a little help from a community loan program, Marcus bought a second-hand food cart and refurbished it. He painted it himself, choosing bright colors that mirrored the warmth of his grandmother's kitchen. At first, business was slow, the competition was fierce, and Marcus had no budget for advertising. But he believed in his food and his vision. He began handing out samples to passers-by, explaining the story behind each dish. "This mac and cheese recipe is over 50 years old," he'd say with a smile. "It's got a secret ingredient, but I'll never tell." Little by little, people started noticing. Word spread about the food cart with the delicious chicken and waffles and the friendly vendor who served them. Loyal customers returned weekly, and Marcus began recognizing faces, learning names, and forming connections. It wasn't just his food that drew people in. It was his story. Locals admired his determination and the care he poured into his work. Maria, the owner of a nearby coffee shop, often dropped by to offer advice. "You've got something special here," she told him one morning. "Just keep going." Soon, the community's support became one of Marcus's greatest assets. When his cart broke down one summer, a group of customers pooled their resources to help him repair it. Another time, a local artist volunteered to create a logo for him, featuring the name Grandma's Kitchen in bold, cheerful letters. Despite the challenges, Marcus's hard work began to pay off. He saved enough money to expand his menu, introducing new dishes that combined his grandmother's recipes with modern twists. He even started catering small events, which brought in additional income. As his customer base grew, so did his ambition. Marcus found himself dreaming not just of a food cart, but of a restaurant, a place where people could sit and enjoy his food in a welcoming space. He started sketching ideas for the layout, imagining a cozy interior with pictures of his grandmother on the walls and shelves lined with jars of his homemade sauces. But more than the logistics, Marcus envisioned what his restaurant would stand for. It wouldn't just be a place to eat. It would be a celebration of community, culture, and the power of perseverance. One evening, as he closed up his cart, he caught a glimpse of a young boy watching him from across the street. The boy's wide eyes reminded Marcus of himself as a child, watching his grandmother in the kitchen. "Hey there," Marcus called out, handing the boy a small plate of peach cobbler. "Keep dreaming big, okay?" The boy grinned, nodding eagerly, and Marcus couldn't help but smile back. His journey was far from over, but in that moment he felt closer than ever to making his dream a reality. Jonathan Reed sat in his corner office, surrounded by polished wood and glass walls that overlooked the city. As the founder and owner of a once thriving fast food chain, Jonathan had spent years building his empire. His face, perpetually set in a smug expression, reflected the confidence of a man who had enjoyed uninterrupted success for most of his life. He relished the power his wealth gave him, but behind the glossy exterior of his chain's branding, cracks were beginning to show. In its heyday, Jonathan's chain had been known for its convenience, affordable prices, and passable quality. Families stopped by for quick meals, and the chain expanded rapidly across the region. But as time went on, Jonathan's approach to running his business began to shift. Where he once focused on quality and customer satisfaction, he now prioritized profits above all else. To cut costs, he began sourcing cheaper ingredients, resulting in meals that lacked the freshness and flavor customers had come to expect. Jonathan dismissed the warning signs when complaints started trickling in. "People will eat anything if it's fast and cheap," he scoffed during a meeting with his board. His arrogance blinded him to the changing landscape of the food industry, where customers increasingly valued authenticity, fresh ingredients, and unique flavors. Meanwhile, competitors were rising to meet the demands of the new market. Small independent restaurants and food trucks offered innovative menus and personal stories that resonated with customers. Even mid-sized chains were pivoting toward healthier and higher quality options. Jonathan, however, doubled down on his belief that his brand was untouchable. As sales declined, his arrogance grew. He refused to take responsibility for the chain's dwindling reputation, instead blaming entitled customers and trendy competition. Rather than innovate, Jonathan attempted to stifle his frustrations by mocking smaller competitors. When he first encountered Marcus's humble food cart, it had seemed like the perfect target for his disdain. "Street food," he'd said dismissively to one of his regional managers. "It's a novelty, nothing more. People might like it for a while, but they'll come back to us. We're a household name." But the numbers didn't lie. Jonathan's chain was bleeding money. Longtime customers stopped coming, leaving restaurants eerily empty during peak hours. Online reviews became a nightmare, with complaints ranging from bland food to unclean dining areas. Some locations faced health code violations, which Jonathan waved off as bad luck. His staff, once loyal and hard-working, began to abandon ship. Employees complained about low wages, poor management, and Jonathan's dismissive attitude toward their concerns. At one franchise meeting, a manager confronted him, saying, "We can't fix these problems if you won't even acknowledge they exist." Jonathan dismissed him with a wave of his hand, unwilling to hear criticism. Even as his empire crumbled, Jonathan clung to his belief that he was superior to the small-timers like Marcus. But every time he heard someone mention Marcus's growing success, it chipped away at his fragile ego. "It's just beginner's luck," he muttered under his breath after seeing a glowing review of Marcus's new restaurant. "These things never last." Jonathan's arrogance had become his greatest enemy. By refusing to adapt, he allowed his competitors to surpass him, and his unwillingness to treat others with respect only alienated the people who might have helped him save his business. As the decline continued, Jonathan found himself on the verge of losing everything he had built. And while he refused to admit it, deep down, Jonathan knew his time at the top was running out. Marcus stood outside a modest storefront on a bustling corner of the city, the faded "For Lease" sign hanging in the window catching his eye. His food cart had been doing well, better than he could have hoped, but he knew it was time to take the next step. Owning a restaurant had been his dream since the days he'd watched his grandmother stir pots of her famous gumbo, and this little space seemed like the perfect place to bring that dream to life. Still, the idea of committing his savings, taking on a lease, and stepping into the world of brick-and-mortar dining was daunting. Marcus had faced challenges before, but this felt different. The stakes were higher. What if he failed? What if the community didn't follow him from the streets to this new venture? His moment of doubt was interrupted by the familiar voice of Maria, the coffee shop owner who had become one of his biggest supporters. "Thinking about it, aren't you?" she said with a knowing smile. Marcus nodded, his eyes still fixed on the building. "It's a big step, Maria. I don't know if I can pull it off." "You've already built something amazing," she replied. "This is just the next chapter, and I have a feeling you'll write it beautifully." Maria's encouragement gave Marcus the push he needed. Within days, he was sitting across from a local investor, presenting his vision for Grandma's kitchen. He spoke with passion about creating a space that felt like home, where the food was made with love, and everyone was welcome. The investor, impressed by Marcus's determination and the success of his food cart, agreed to provide a small loan to help him get started. Transforming the empty storefront into a warm and inviting restaurant was no small feat. But Marcus poured his heart into every detail. He painted the walls a sunny yellow and hung vintage photos of his grandmother, along with handwritten recipes framed like works of art. He even brought in an old jukebox to play the gospel and soul tunes that had been the soundtrack of his childhood. The day of the grand opening arrived, and Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and nerves as he unlocked the doors for the first time. To his surprise and relief, a line of customers stretched down the block. Familiar faces from his food cart days were among them, along with curious newcomers drawn in by the buzz surrounding Grandma's kitchen. Inside, the air was filled with the aroma of Marcus's signature dishes: savory chicken and waffles, creamy mac and cheese, and, of course, his grandmother's peach cobbler. The kitchen hummed with activity as Marcus and his small team worked tirelessly to serve the eager crowd. The response was overwhelming. Customers raved about the food, posting glowing reviews online and telling their friends about the new spot in town. Local food bloggers began to take notice, featuring Grandma's Kitchen in articles and social media posts. Within weeks, Marcus's restaurant became a local sensation. Lines were a common sight, and reservations were booked weeks in advance. The walls of the restaurant were soon adorned with awards and glowing reviews, including one from a renowned food critic who declared Marcus's peach cobbler a slice of heaven. But the success wasn't just about the food. Marcus had created a space where people felt connected, a place where strangers became friends over shared meals. He hosted community nights, offering discounts to local families and donating meals to those in need. Marcus's restaurant became a beacon of hope and inspiration, a testament to what hard work, perseverance, and a supportive community could achieve. As Marcus's star continued to rise, he began receiving offers to expand his brand. Investors approached him with ideas for additional locations, while chefs reached out hoping to collaborate. Despite the newfound attention, Marcus remained grounded. Every decision he made was guided by his grandmother's teachings and the values she had instilled in him. He couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. From a young boy learning to cook in his grandmother's kitchen to a street vendor with big dreams, and now the owner of a thriving restaurant. Marcus was proud of what he had accomplished, but he also knew that this was just the beginning. Jonathan sat in his once pristine office, the leather chair that used to symbolize power and prestige now worn and creaking under his weight. The papers scattered across his desk painted a bleak picture. Declining sales charts, unpaid invoices, and resignation letters from his staff. His once thriving food chain, which had dominated the fast food market for years, was now a shadow of its former self. Despite the glaring signs of trouble, Jonathan refused to accept responsibility, clinging to the belief that his success would somehow rebound without him needing to change. As his profits plummeted, the reviews for his chain became harsher. Social media posts mocked the stale, flavorless food and the unclean dining areas that had become the norm. "Avoid at all costs," read one viral tweet, accompanied by a photo of a half-cooked burger. Another customer left a scathing review online, describing the service as indifferent at best and the food as barely edible. These were the echoes of a truth Jonathan had refused to hear for years. His obsession with cutting costs had stripped away the very qualities that had once made his brand popular. His arrogance didn't just alienate customers. Inside his company, tensions ran high. Managers complained of impossible demands, long hours, and a lack of support. Turnover among employees skyrocketed, with seasoned staff leaving in droves. One day, his top regional manager slammed a resignation letter on Jonathan's desk. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine," the manager said. "Your unwillingness to listen is killing this company." Jonathan dismissed the outburst, but deep down, the words lingered. The decline was slow at first, but soon it became impossible to ignore. Competitors began to overtake him, offering fresher, more innovative menu options. Smaller, independent restaurants like Marcus's were thriving, creating a buzz that Jonathan's chain could no longer compete with. The very community he had once looked down upon as unimportant was now rallying around businesses that represented care, quality, and authenticity, values his chain had abandoned long ago. Adding to his humiliation, Jonathan couldn't ignore Marcus's growing success. Reports of Marcus's restaurant thriving began appearing in local media. Customers were raving about Grandma's Kitchen, which had become a hotspot for food lovers and critics alike. Jonathan saw the glowing reviews and the smiling faces in photos of packed dining rooms. It stung more than he cared to admit. One evening, after another disappointing sales report, Jonathan drove by Marcus's restaurant out of curiosity. The sight of the long lines snaking around the block sent a pang of bitterness through him. It's just beginner's luck, he muttered to himself, though the vibrant energy surrounding Grandma's kitchen told a different story. Jonathan's frustration grew into desperation. With mounting losses, he began selling off locations to stay afloat. Each sale felt like a piece of his empire slipping away, but he justified it as a temporary measure. The reality, however, was clear. His chain was crumbling, and his name, once synonymous with success, was becoming a cautionary tale. Despite the mounting evidence of his failures, Jonathan refused to change his ways. Instead of innovating or admitting his mistakes, he doubled down on his disdain for competitors like Marcus. "He's just a fad," Jonathan would say to anyone who brought up Marcus's name. But as the months passed, even he couldn't deny that Marcus's success wasn't a fluke. It was the result of hard work, dedication, and values Jonathan had long since abandoned. Sitting alone in his office late one night, Jonathan stared at the empty desk where his assistant once worked. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. For the first time, he felt the weight of his arrogance pressing down on him. He had mocked Marcus, dismissed his dreams, and ignored the signs of his own decline. Now his empire was in shambles, and the street vendor he once ridiculed was thriving in the very market Jonathan had once dominated. It was a quiet morning when Marcus sat at his restaurant's office desk, sipping coffee and reviewing the latest financial reports. Business at Grandma's Kitchen was thriving beyond his wildest dreams. With a second location on the horizon and investors expressing interest in his expansion plans, Marcus felt a sense of pride he hadn't experienced before. But what caught his attention that morning wasn't his own success. It was a headline in the local business section. "Major food chain faces collapse. Owner seeks buyer." Marcus's heart skipped a beat as the very principles that had fueled his success with Grandma's Kitchen. Marcus began with the foundation, the food. The first step was overhauling the menu to focus on fresh, high-quality ingredients. He brought in trusted suppliers, ensuring that every meal served at the chain would meet the same standards as his own restaurant. Recipes were revamped, with a renewed emphasis on flavor and authenticity. Marcus even added a few of his grandmother's signature dishes to the menu, like her famous chicken and waffles, which quickly became a customer favorite. Next, Marcus tackled the atmosphere. He wanted every restaurant to feel welcoming and warm, a place where families could gather and communities could connect. Gone were the sterile, generic interiors that had defined the chain under Jonathan's leadership. Marcus replaced them with vibrant colors, comfortable seating, and artwork that celebrated local culture. He encouraged each location to incorporate elements unique to its community, making every restaurant a reflection of the people it served. Marcus's leadership style was a breath of fresh air for the chain's employees. Unlike Jonathan, who had ruled with an iron fist, Marcus led with empathy and respect. He held meetings with staff at every level, listening to their concerns and ideas. "You're the backbone of this company," he told them. "Together we're going to rebuild this brand into something we can all be proud of." His commitment to employee welfare went beyond words. Marcus implemented fair wages, better benefits, and training programs to help employees grow in their careers. He also prioritized hiring from underserved communities, offering opportunities to those who had often been overlooked. These changes not only improved morale, but also created a sense of purpose and pride among the staff. One of Marcus's boldest moves was rebranding the chain. While he decided to keep the original name, he introduced a new tagline: "Fresh food, fresh starts." The message was clear. This was a brand dedicated to providing not just great meals, but also opportunities for growth and connection. The community responded with overwhelming support. Customers who had long abandoned the chain returned, curious to see the transformation. The difference was palpable. The food tasted better, the staff was friendlier, and the overall experience was leagues ahead of what it had been under Jonathan's management. Marcus also took the initiative to connect directly with customers. He organized community events, such as free meal days for local families and cooking workshops for kids. These events reinforced the chain's new identity as a place that genuinely cared about the people it served. As the chain began to thrive under Marcus's leadership, word spread far and wide. Media outlets picked up the story of the former street vendor who had transformed a failing empire into a beacon of hope and innovation. Articles and news segments celebrated Marcus's vision, and social media buzzed with praise for his leadership and the chain's revitalization. For Marcus, however, the real reward wasn't the headlines or the accolades. It was seeing the positive impact his efforts had on people's lives. Employees who once dreaded coming to work now looked forward to it. Customers who had been disappointed by the chain's previous mediocrity now left with smiles on their faces, and communities that had been ignored by big corporations felt seen and valued. Despite the challenges and long hours, Marcus remained grounded. Every decision he made was guided by the lessons his grandmother had taught him. Work hard, treat people with respect, and never lose sight of what truly matters. Jonathan Reed sat alone in his small apartment, a far cry from the luxurious penthouse he had once called home. The sale of his food chain had left him with enough money to get by, but it came at the cost of his pride. The once arrogant businessman who had scoffed at Marcus's dreams and dismissed his own failings was now forced to confront the reality of his downfall. Initially, Jonathan's reaction to Marcus's success was bitter. He would watch news segments and read articles about the revitalized chain, brimming with resentment. He got lucky, Jonathan muttered to himself, unwilling to acknowledge the flaws that had led to his own failure. But as time went on and the noise of his excuses quieted, he began to see the truth. Marcus's rise wasn't luck. It was the result of hard work, humility, and a genuine commitment to people. One evening, as Jonathan scrolled through his phone, he stumbled upon a video of Marcus speaking at a community event. In the clip, Marcus shared his story of starting with nothing but a food cart and a dream. He spoke passionately about the importance of staying true to one's values and treating others with respect. For the first time, Jonathan felt something other than resentment. He felt regret. The turning point came when Jonathan decided to visit one of the restaurants he had sold. As he walked through the doors, he was struck by the changes. The place was vibrant and inviting, a stark contrast to the sterile environment it had once been. The staff greeted him warmly, their smiles genuine, and the food smelled incredible. Jonathan sat at a corner table, quietly observing as families laughed, children played, and customers enjoyed their meals. It was clear that Marcus had turned his former empire into something special. As he ate, Jonathan reflected on his past decisions. His focus on profits over people, his refusal to innovate, and his arrogance had all contributed to his downfall. More importantly, he realized how wrong he had been to mock Marcus and underestimate his potential. Determined to make amends, Jonathan reached out to Marcus. The meeting was awkward at first. Jonathan, once so full of bluster, now seemed humbled and uncertain. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began, his voice heavy with sincerity. "But I owe you an apology. I treated you unfairly, and I see now how wrong I was. What you've done with the chain is remarkable." Marcus, ever gracious, listened without interrupting. When Jonathan finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong," Marcus said, "and while I can't change the past, I believe in second chances." Their conversation turned toward the future, and Marcus surprised Jonathan with an offer. "If you're willing to learn and contribute, I could use your experience as a consultant," he said. "There's value in your journey, even the mistakes." For Jonathan, the offer felt like a lifeline. He accepted, not just for the chance to rebuild his reputation, but to finally do something meaningful. Under Marcus's mentorship, Jonathan began working to support the chain's growth. While the road to redemption wasn't easy, Jonathan embraced it with newfound humility and determination. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself, something worth fighting for. The grand reopening of Marcus's food chain, now rebranded as Grandma's Kitchen and Company, was a celebration unlike any other. The once struggling chain had transformed into a thriving symbol of resilience, innovation, and community. Marcus stood on a small stage outside one of the flagship restaurants, addressing a crowd of employees, customers, and supporters. His grandmother's recipes, which had started it all, were now the heart of a nationwide success story. As Marcus spoke, his voice was filled with gratitude and pride. "This isn't just my story," he said, gesturing toward the diverse crowd. "It's about all of us, about what happens when we work together, lift each other up, and believe in something bigger than ourselves." The applause was thunderous, with smiles lighting up the faces of those who had been a part of Marcus's journey. Under Marcus's leadership, the chain had become more than just a business. It was a force for good. He established programs to support underserved communities, creating job opportunities and funding culinary scholarships for aspiring chefs from marginalized backgrounds. Each restaurant became a hub for community events, from food drives to cultural festivals, reinforcing the chain's mission of inclusivity and connection. Jonathan Reed stood in the crowd, watching Marcus with a mixture of awe and admiration. Though his role as a consultant was small, he had found meaning in helping Marcus expand the chain's reach. The experience had humbled him, teaching him lessons about leadership, respect, and the value of community. For Jonathan, Marcus's forgiveness had been a lifeline, and he was determined to honor it. Inside the restaurants, the changes were evident. Customers raved about the food, which was fresh, flavorful, and lovingly prepared. The staff, once disheartened and undervalued, now worked with pride and purpose. Marcus's commitment to hiring from underserved communities had brought new energy and diversity to the workforce, creating a welcoming environment for everyone. One evening, Marcus returned to the very spot where his journey had begun, the street corner where he had operated his humble food cart. The cart was long gone, replaced by a bustling restaurant with his name on the sign. Standing there, he reflected on the challenges he had faced and the lessons he had learned. He thought of his grandmother, whose recipes and values had inspired him, and smiled. The story of Grandma's Kitchen and Co. became a national phenomenon, inspiring countless others to pursue their dreams despite adversity. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences, share his story in interviews, and mentor young entrepreneurs. But through it all, he remained grounded, always crediting his success to the support of his community and the values his grandmother had instilled in him. At a special event celebrating the chain's success, Marcus delivered a heartfelt speech. "Success isn't just about what you achieve," he said, his voice steady and warm. "It's about who you lift up along the way and the impact you leave behind." As the sun set on the celebration, Marcus looked out at the smiling faces around him, employees, customers, and friends. His journey had come full circle, but the legacy he was building was just beginning.